The Galactic Empire had existed for thousands of years, stretching its reach across millions of stars and thousands of species. It was an unstoppable force, a civilization so ancient that the very concept of defeat had become nothing more than a forgotten legend. In their golden halls, carved from starlight and stone, the emperors ruled with pride, their courts filled with the soft songs of 1,000 worlds submitting willingly to their grand vision. So when a small, unremarkable blue world on the outer spiral of a minor galaxy began transmitting signals into space, no one took it seriously. The Council of Lords, composed of the greatest minds and generals of the Empire, watched the flickering, primitive messages from Earth and chuckled over their wine. They saw images of humans shouting into crude cameras, launching tiny rockets that barely scratched the edge of their own atmosphere, and waging small wars over invisible lines on maps. "A young species," said the Lord of Intelligence, barely out of their caves. The Lord of War agreed, tapping his clawed finger against a map. "They'll be a fine addition to the Empire. Their spirit might even amuse the gladiatorial arenas for a time." A decision was made without any real discussion. A small expeditionary fleet would be sent to Sol, not to destroy, but to liberate the humans from their ignorance. The council laughed as they toasted, certain that yet another primitive race would soon bow before their glory. The fleet they dispatched was modest by imperial standards, only a few dozen ships, but each vessel was a floating fortress, carrying weapons that had destroyed civilizations far stronger than anything humanity could dream of. As the fleet jumped into Sol space, near the dark edges of Pluto's orbit, their commanders fully expected the humans to send up white flags, or perhaps pitiful little defense craft that would be blown apart like dust in a solar wind. They laughed when they saw Earth satellites scrambling to identify them. They laughed when they intercepted human communications filled with confusion, fear, and hurried military chatter. They laughed because they believed that humanity was powerless. But as the hours passed, the mood on the Imperial flagships began to change. Small, fast-moving objects began to launch from Earth and its surrounding stations. Human ships, primitive-looking, angular, almost ugly by Imperial standards, began forming defensive lines across the inner system. These vessels did not retreat. They did not send diplomats begging for mercy. Instead, a single human transmission cut across every Imperial channel. The voice was calm, cold, and resolute. "You are trespassing in sovereign Terran space. Withdraw immediately or face consequences." The Imperial commander, a towering being of crystal and smoke named Varrock, was insulted. He ordered the human signal ignored and prepared to issue a command to begin pacification operations. After all, what could a planet full of savages do against the might of the Empire? Yet, before he could even issue the order, several of his outer ships reported being under attack. Human weapons were primitive in theory, but in practice, they were terrifyingly effective. Massive projectiles, moving faster than anything the Empire had ever seen, slammed into Imperial shields, shattering them in bursts of plasma and shrapnel. Varrock stared at the battle screens in disbelief. Human ships moved like packs of wolves, darting in and out of firing ranges, exploiting weaknesses with brutal precision. They adapted faster than any opponent the Empire had faced before. Worse, their tactics were not predictable. Where most species would follow patterns, humans changed strategies mid-battle. The Empire's fleet regrouped near Pluto's orbit, their pride bruised but not broken, their commanders trying to understand how a so-called primitive species had wounded them so badly. Across the Imperial bridge, voices whispered of anomalies, of unexpected weapon strength, of human ships moving like phantoms through the dark. Still, the arrogance of 1,000 years weighed heavily on Admiral Varrock's mind, and he refused to believe that these humans were anything more than lucky savages clinging to outdated technology. The second wave would crush their spirit once and for all, he thought, and so he signaled deeper into the Empire, requesting reinforcements, confident that overwhelming numbers would solve what simple tactics could not. Meanwhile, across the cold black of space, Earth was anything but calm. Humanity had known the Empire would come back stronger. They had watched the remains of the first battle, had salvaged enemy wreckage, had studied the strange physics and unknown materials with a hunger no alien race could match. In underground bunkers and orbital stations, Terran leaders moved fast, accelerating plans that had once been designed for centuries into mere months. Project Aegis, once a dream, now armed their fleets. Every lesson, every weakness exposed in the Empire's proud ships was recorded, studied, and weaponized with terrifying speed. Humanity had never needed millennia to adapt. They evolved with every heartbeat. When the Empire's reinforcements arrived, triple the size of the First Fleet, they did not bother with diplomacy. They advanced with full power, determined to wipe the stain of human defiance from their history. Yet before they could cross into Earth's inner system, a single human ship approached. It was not large or heavily armed compared to the Imperial dreadnoughts, but it was confident, almost casual, as it broadcast a wide-band message across all channels. The voice that spoke was that of Ambassador General Evelyn Ross, leader of the newly formed Terran Defense Command, and her words were simple, deadly, and without hesitation. This is your first and final warning. Leave Terran space now, or we will end you. Across the Empire's fleet, laughter erupted once again, cruel and mocking. Varrock himself snarled a response, declaring humanity conquered by divine right, promising mercy if Earth surrendered immediately. But the human ship simply cut transmission, turned, and vanished into the black, as if daring the Empire to follow. Moments later, chaos exploded. Without warning, dozens of human ships, previously hidden among the moons and asteroid belts, revealed themselves. They struck first and without mercy, disabling key Imperial vessels with pinpoint strikes. Missile salvos darkened the stars, kinetic rounds shattered mighty hulls, and energy weapons of brutal simplicity cut down shields like paper. The Empire's battle formations, so used to facing predictable enemies, crumbled under the sudden and savage assault. Every human pilot fought with a rage and precision that no algorithm could predict, adapting faster than any Imperial AI could counter. Even as losses mounted, the Empire's commanders refused to retreat, clinging to the belief that numbers would save them. But humanity had built traps within traps, hidden weapon platforms inside the rings of Saturn, minefields disguised as debris clouds, and ambushes so deep in space that even retreat became a deadly game. Varrock watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart, realizing too late that humanity had never been playing the same game. They had studied the Empire, understood their pride, predicted every move they would make, and prepared the perfect slaughter. It was not just technology that defeated the Empire, but sheer, burning human will, the refusal to kneel before those who would chain them. As the remnants of the Imperial fleet limped back beyond Pluto, bloodied and broken, a final human transmission echoed across the system, carried on every frequency, in every language spoken by every species that could hear. This is not your empire. This is not your destiny. This is not your victory. Humanity stands free. Across Earth and the colonies of Mars and Luna, billions of humans watched the battle's aftermath and understood that the war had truly begun. There would be no peace with those who saw them as slaves. There would be no surrender. Humanity had delivered its first and only warning, and now the stars themselves would bear witness to the fire they would unleash. And somewhere, deep within the heart of the Empire, where the Council of Lords still laughed and mocked the stubborn defiance of a newborn species, a small thread of doubt began to weave itself through their minds, a shadow cast not by weapons, but by the terrible realization that for the first time in living memory, they had made an enemy they could not easily break. An enemy that adapted faster, fought harder, and refused to accept the fate written for them by ancient hands. The Council believed themselves gods among mortals, but soon they would learn the oldest truth of the universe: when humanity rises, it does not rise quietly. It rises like a storm. The defeat of the Empire's Second Fleet should have ended humanity's dreams of survival, but instead it lit a fire so fierce that no empire, no matter how ancient, could hope to extinguish it. Across Earth and every colony spinning through the cold silence of space, humanity prepared not just for defense, but for retaliation. Scientists, engineers, and generals worked side by side, turning every piece of stolen Imperial technology into weapons of terrifying strength. The Terran Defense Command, once a loose alliance of Earth's fractured nations, grew into a single unstoppable force, a storm that gathered strength with every passing hour. Humanity did not waste time building massive, slow-moving monuments like the Empire. Instead, they created fleets of fast, sharp, deadly ships, each one designed to hunt, to outthink, and to destroy. They built railguns that could punch holes through the thickest armor, stealth frigates that could hide even from Imperial sensors, and AI battle systems that learned and evolved faster than any organic brain could comprehend. Every soldier, every pilot, every engineer knew the stakes. This was not a war for land or gold. It was a war for existence, and they would rather burn the heavens than kneel. When humanity launched its first counterstrike, the Empire barely noticed. A single outpost near the edge of their territory went silent. Then another. And another. At first, the Council of Lords believed it was rebellion from within, some minor trouble that would sort itself out. They had ruled for so long that they could not imagine a true threat. But as the months passed, the pattern became clear. Someone was striking deep into their heart, moving faster than their fleets could react, striking with a fury that no loyal citizen could match. The name whispered in terror across dying comms and abandoned worlds was always the same: humans. Humanity had learned well from the Empire's arrogance, but they added something the Empire had forgotten long ago: speed, unpredictability, and absolute determination. No world was too far, no fortress too strong. Human ships appeared where they should not, hit with surgical precision, and vanished into the stars before Imperial reinforcements could even launch. They liberated slaves, toppled puppet rulers, and offered the oppressed a simple choice: fight for freedom or remain chained. And thousands chose to fight, rising up with stolen weapons, tearing down statues of Imperial dominance, and sending desperate pleas for help to the advancing Terran fleets. The Empire tried to respond with brute force, sending fleet after fleet, but it was like trying to fight smoke with a sword. Humanity never attacked the same way twice. Some worlds were infiltrated by human agents who stirred rebellion before the first shots were fired. Some fleets were drawn into false battles, only to be ambushed by mines hidden within asteroid belts. Some great armadas were defeated without a single human ship being seen, their supply lines cut and their command systems hacked by unseen Terran hands. Each Imperial loss grew heavier than the last, not just in ships, but in reputation. For the first time, Varrock, once the proud admiral who had laughed at Earth's first stand, now commanded from deep within Imperial space, scarred and bitter, knowing that humanity had marked him as a special target. He watched his maps shrink day by day, entire sectors falling silent, entire species choosing the chaos of rebellion over the order of the Empire. Meanwhile, back on Earth, humanity did not celebrate. They knew the Empire's true strength had not yet been unleashed. Their greatest fleets, their darkest weapons, their oldest secrets still slept somewhere deep within their core worlds. But humanity had tasted victory, and more importantly, they had made the Empire bleed. They understood now that survival meant more than defense. It meant carrying the fight to the enemy's doorstep, showing the stars that no matter how small their home might seem, their spirit was boundless. It was not enough to defend Earth. They had to make sure no empire would ever again rise to threaten them or anyone else. Across the coalition of free worlds, banners bearing the Terran insignia flew beside those of dozens of alien species, all now fighting under a single cause: freedom born of fire. For every ship humanity lost, 10 more rose to take its place, faster and smarter. For every soldier who fell, 100 more stood ready. The Empire's spies sent back desperate warnings, telling the Council that this was not a simple rebellion, not a minor uprising. It was a storm, vast and unstoppable, growing with every world it touched. It was not just ships and guns. It was an idea, and ideas could not be killed with fleets. The Council of Lords, once smug and untouchable, found themselves arguing and panicking within their marble halls. Some called for total war, others for negotiation, but all knew deep down that the Empire was no longer the master of the galaxy. They had laughed when humanity first spoke into the void. They had mocked when humanity warned them to leave. Now, with every passing day, the laughter had died, replaced by fear, by desperation, and by the horrifying truth that the stars were changing, and at the center of it all, humanity stood, unbroken, unbowed, and relentless. The storm had come, and it wore a human face. The storm that humanity unleashed showed no signs of slowing as it tore across the Empire's once unchallenged territory, leaving broken worlds and shattered fleets in its wake. Humanity moved like a force of nature, not with cruelty, but with relentless purpose, striking down every symbol of imperial power they found, burning the old ways to the ground so that freedom could grow from the ashes. The Empire tried to hold the line, sending its elite guard fleets, its legendary champions, and its most powerful weapons, but nothing could match the speed, the strategy, and the raw fury that drove the Terran forces forward. On planet after planet, great cities that had once shone with the Empire's pride fell silent, their towers reduced to ruins, their skies filled with the banners of resistance. The Terran Defense Command showed no mercy to the Empire's strongholds, but they showed compassion to the people, freeing countless billions who had lived their lives under iron rule. It was not conquest that humanity brought, it was liberation, and that was what made them unstoppable. For every planet the Empire lost, 10 more slipped through their fingers as the oppressed realized that hope had finally come from the stars. On the world of Veridax Prime, once called the Jewel of the Eastern Rim, the Empire staged its greatest defense yet, deploying titanic war machines and entire legions bred for war. They believed humanity would bleed against its iron walls, but the Terrans did not come in force. Instead, small strike teams slipped past their defenses, sabotaging reactors, cutting off supplies, turning the very strength of the Empire against itself. In less than a week, Veridax Prime fell, not through a grand battle, but through the slow, choking collapse of everything the Empire had trusted. Watching from the ruins, the local people raised the human flag alongside their own, not as conquered subjects, but as free citizens standing at humanity's side. Across the stars, scenes like this repeated again and again. Worlds that had known only the cold fist of the Empire for generations now burned with the fires of rebellion, their skies lit with the glow of battles that the Empire could no longer win. Every loss weakened the old regime, not just in military strength, but in the hearts and minds of its people. The Council of Lords, once the masters of everything they saw, now argued in panic and desperation. Some demanded the use of forbidden weapons, devices so terrible that even they had once sworn never to unleash them. Others begged for retreat, for surrender, for peace talks that humanity would never accept after so much blood had been spilled. But it was already too late. Humanity had passed the point of forgiveness. They had offered the Empire a chance to leave, a single warning, and it had been answered with scorn and violence. Now humanity would answer with fire. Across the command centers of Earth and Mars, new plans were drawn, darker and harder than any that had come before. Humanity would not stop until the Empire itself was dragged from its golden throne and cast into the dust of history. It was no longer just a war between armies. It was a war between futures, and only one would survive. Admiral Varrock, once so proud, now commanded the last great fleets from the shattered core worlds of the Empire, his mind heavy with the knowledge that they faced not just military defeat, but extinction. He had watched humanity grow from a minor annoyance into a force that reshaped the very stars, and he knew that their greatest strength was not their weapons or their ships, but their unbreakable spirit. Even as imperial propaganda tried to paint the humans as monsters, the truth could not be hidden. Humanity fought not to conquer, but to free. It was a truth that poisoned the Empire from within, turning soldiers against their officers, citizens against their rulers, until entire sectors fell not through invasion, but through rebellion. The day came when humanity finally reached the capital sector, a place that had been untouched by war for 1,000 years. The Council ordered every ship, every soldier, every weapon to stand in its defense, believing that here, at the heart of their ancient power, they could finally turn the tide. But humanity did not come with a single fleet. They came with hundreds, formed from their own ships and the rebel vessels of every species the Empire had ever oppressed. It was not a human armada that appeared on the Empire's doorstep. It was an armada of the free, an unstoppable tide driven by a fury that the Empire's walls could not hope to contain. The final battle was not swift, nor was it bloodless. The Empire fought with the desperation of a cornered beast, throwing everything they had into the firestorm that raged across their skies. But humanity had learned from every battle, every mistake, and every loss. They moved with precision, cutting the Empire's forces apart piece by piece, grinding them down until even the mightiest dreadnoughts fell silent, burning as they tumbled from the sky. As the sun rose over the smoldering ruins of the imperial capital, the Council of Lords, once so arrogant, found themselves dragged from their halls by their own people. They were not killed, nor were they tortured. Humanity's war was not one of revenge, but of justice. They were made to stand trial before the worlds they had once ruled, to answer for their crimes with no armies left to protect them. Across the galaxy, a new era began, not one ruled by blood or by terror, but by the simple, unstoppable idea that freedom was worth any cost. Humanity had not come to replace one empire with another. They had come to break the chains of 1,000 worlds, and they had succeeded. The stars, once cold and distant, now sang with the voices of the free, and at the center of it all, humanity stood unbowed, the storm they had wrought still echoing across the endless night. The smoke of war had not yet cleared from the skies of the former empire, when humanity began the slow, careful work of rebuilding what had been broken. Across the galaxy, ruins stood as silent reminders of battles fought, of sacrifices made, and of chains broken. But among the shattered cities and blackened battlefields, new life stirred, fragile but determined. Humanity had never wanted to rule. They had fought for freedom, and now they would ensure it lasted. The Terran Defense Command transformed into the Coalition of Free Worlds, a council where every liberated species, every world that had thrown off the Empire's yoke, had a voice. It was not an easy task. Centuries of fear and division could not be erased overnight. Some worlds still bore scars too deep to heal quickly, some leaders struggled with distrust, and some systems teetered on the edge of chaos, unsure of how to live without masters. But humanity led by example, not by decree. They sent engineers, doctors, teachers, not conquerors. They rebuilt hospitals before fortresses, schools before armories, showing the galaxy that real strength came not from domination, but from unity and hope. In the great halls of the new coalition assembly, Evelyn Ross stood before a gathering of hundreds of species, her voice carrying through translators into 1,000 languages. She spoke not of human victory, but of shared destiny, of a future where no empire would ever again rise to enslave others. Her words burned with a quiet passion that touched even the most cynical hearts. She reminded them all that the stars belong to everyone, not just the strong. Across 1,000 worlds, statues of old emperors were torn down, and in their place rose monuments not to men or races, but to the idea that every being had the right to stand free beneath the endless sky. In the darkness between stars, where the old empire's warships had once patrolled with cruel authority, new ships now traveled, bearing aid, trade, and promises of friendship. Borders softened, trade routes reopened, and once closed worlds blossomed with color and music and life. It was not perfect. There were still pirates, still warlords who tried to carve their own little kingdoms from the ruins. But humanity had taught the galaxy a final lesson. When the free stand together, no tyrant can last for long. On Earth, once the lonely cradle of mankind, celebrations echoed through every city and town. Humanity looked to the stars, not with fear but with hope, knowing they were no longer alone, no longer a small voice shouting into a cold universe. They were part of something greater now, builders of a future that would shine brighter than any empire's throne. Children on distant colonies grew up hearing the stories of the Great Uprising, of the battles fought not just with weapons, but with courage and conviction. The names of fallen heroes, human and alien alike, were carved into the great walls of remembrance, and every year the stars were honored, not with parades of weapons, but with the quiet light of beacons that burned in memory of the price paid for freedom. The leaders of the coalition knew that threats would always exist. Somewhere, in the dark, new dangers would rise. But humanity had taught the galaxy a different way to face fear. No longer would the stars belong to the cruel. No longer would a single empire decide the fate of billions. Now, the stars belonged to all who dared to dream, to fight, to hope. Admiral Varrock, broken but alive, watched the birth of this new world from the quiet exile the Coalition had granted him. He had been offered a trial, even death, but instead, he had asked to live long enough to see the empire he once served replaced by something better. In his final days, he wrote volumes of history, warnings, and wisdom for the generations that would follow. A man who had once been an enemy, now a witness to humanity's greatest triumph. His last words, before the stars claimed him, were simple and filled with awe. We thought ourselves gods. We never understood that true power lies not in ruling, but in freeing. As new colonies rose on distant planets, as forgotten species found their voices again, and as the darkness of the past slowly faded beneath the light of a new day, humanity continued to move forward, never forgetting the lessons of blood and fire. They had earned their place among the stars, not through conquest, but through courage. And so, under skies filled with new constellations, a new dawn rose. A future where ships traveled not in chains but in freedom, where knowledge flowed faster than weapons, and where the smallest voice could change the course of history. Humanity had not ended the galaxy's struggles, but they had given it something far greater than peace. They had given it the chance to hope. The laughter of the Empire was gone now, replaced by the songs of millions of free worlds, by the quiet, fierce determination of countless beings who would never again kneel before tyrants. The stars stretched out before them, vast and endless, not as a cold and empty void, but as a home waiting to be filled with life, dreams, and possibilities. And humanity, the once overlooked children of a small blue world, stood ready to meet that future with open hands and unbreakable hearts.